Ukraine has banned 11 political parties within the country. Now, as I'll get to, there is more to it than just the headline. There is their justification for it. There is also a little more to the story in terms of how Ukraine is now attempting to unify the media. With all that said, it's important to lay out at the beginning of this video, none of these moves by Ukraine, which I may or may not agree with, in fact, I don't agree with them. I think they are largely incorrect. They are undemocratic moves. That doesn't justify Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So you're going to see some people cover this story that are going to use this story and other stories similar moves that, in terms of Zelenskyy calling for a no-fly zone, which I also don't agree with, or what he's doing with the media. They will try and use this as a justification for Putin invading Ukraine. Yet those same people, I assume, were against the Iraq War. Do you justify the U.S. invading Iraq because Saddam Hussein was a dictator? Probably not. So why are there people out there using stories like this to try and justify Putin's invasion of Ukraine? Ask yourself that question. So there are, it's propaganda. People will use this kind of story to push Putin's, propagandist message. I'm using this to simply point out that this is wrong. And at the same time, it doesn't justify a war that has misplaced tens of millions and, of course, killed many civilians in the process. So before I even get into this particular story about banning these parties and what Zelenskyy is doing with the media, this update just came out. The number of Ukrainians displaced by Russia's invasion has swelled to nearly 10 million, according to the UN. So it's important to understand, ultimately, this is what matters. This is what matters above all else. Not to say these other stories don't matter, but this clearly is what matters most. If you disagree with that, you're weird. There's something else going on up there. So, and it's amazing to see people that claim to be on the left heavily cover these stories about, the Azov battalion, which is a neo-Nazi battalion within Ukraine. Yes, that is terrible. Does that mean that Putin should invade Ukraine? Does that mean that Nazis don't exist in any other military around the world? So, you have to be able to, absorb stories like the banning of these parties and understand that is not a justification for war. So getting on to this story now about these parties being banned. This from The Guardian. The country's National Security and Defense Council took the decision to ban the parties from any political activity. Most of the parties affected were small, but one of them, the opposition Platform for Life, has 44 seats in the 450-seat Ukrainian parliament. Now, as I'll get to, Ukraine has a reason for why they are doing this. In particular, this party is clearly pro-Putin. It's obvious. That's what this party's about. There's some worry that Russia was going to try and use this party to replace Zelenskyy. That said, they have no power right now. As I'll get to, the leader of this party has fled. They have no idea where he even is. This is an undemocratic move. So you don't fight other undemocratic moves by being undemocratic yourself. I don't think that solves the problem, but I'm still going to point out their justification, and you may agree with their justification. But I don't ultimately see how this is going to solve anything right now. That said, understand, this does not justify an invasion of the country. So more here. The opposition Platform for Life, Ukraine's biggest opposition party, is led by Viktor Medvedchuk, a pro-Moscow oligarch with close ties to the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Party officials later said the suspension had no legal basis. The Ukrainian authorities last year charged Medvedchuk, a longtime ally of Putin who is believed to be the godfather of Medvedchuk's daughter, with treason and placed the oligarch under house arrest, a move that angered the Kremlin. Ukraine said Medvedchuk escaped house arrest 3 days after Russia started its invasion of Ukraine, and his whereabouts are currently unknown. All right, so this individual clearly aligned with Putin. I don't see what doing this accomplishes. But you may disagree. You may think, well, it's a unique time. So it's perfectly fine for Ukraine to just outright ban, 11 parties. And to be clear as well, there's some like I don't know if it's misinformation or disinformation or lies, whatever it is, claiming that these parties are left-wing parties, that Zelensky's banning 11 left-wing parties. Is this left-wing to you? I mean, if aligning with the Kremlin is left-wing to you, okay, then I guess they're left-wing. But it doesn't appear to be a left-wing party. They may have some roots in the USSR, as I'll get to more on that later as well. But these aren't left-wing parties. These are largely Putin-aligned parties. In fact, they are all Putin-aligned or Russia-aligned parties. That doesn't justify the banning of them. It's just to say they are not left-wing parties. But before I get to more on that, this is also what Zelensky is doing. So, citing martial law, Ukraine president signs decree to combine national TV channels into one platform. One may argue, how is this any different than what Putin is doing in Russia? Outright banning independent media, putting everything into just the one Kremlin propaganda channel. So, again, not very democratic here. But you may say, well, they are simply doing this to ban, pro-Putin propaganda that is lying about the intentions of the war or whatever. And that's probably what this is about. But this is early. We don't know the actual implication or the implications of this, how they are applying this. But that said, it's still, regardless of how it's being applied, it is still undemocratic to simply ban every other media except for one. But more information on this, I'm sure, will come out. Now, on the party aspect of this, so this is Teres Belus. I apologize for maybe saying your name wrong, but this is a leftist Ukrainian commenting on these parties being banned, saying, unfortunately, the war intensifies authoritarian and nationalist tendencies in Ukraine. But while this move needs to be criticized, it should be borne in mind that it was for the parties. They were banned not because they were left-wing, but because they were pro-Putin. Left parties that are not pro-Russia have not been banned. At the same time, all these parties are fragments of the Communist Party of Soviet Union, and after the collapse of the USSR, they became more conservative and even racist. They exploited Soviet nostalgia, but did not engage in social struggle. But many members of the party have condemned Russia's aggression and refused to cooperate with Russians in the occupied cities. And in occupied Kherson, so the party referenced here, OPZZ, this is the party I mentioned earlier, the Opposition Platform for Life party. So he says here, this faction even disbanded itself so that Russians would not try to use it. So a particular faction of this party decided that, hey, we may inadvertently be helping Putin here by staying together, so they disbanded to ensure that Russia was not going to use them for their own propaganda. So a good move here, but again, that's one faction of the party. That doesn't mean the leadership of the party feels the same. But going on here, this is another reaction saying, fun fact, one of the parties on the suspended list, a husk of once popular Socialist Party of Ukraine, was usurped in 2017 by Ilya Kiva, protege of Arsen Avakov, who's a cop responsible for the rise of Ukrainian far-right movements like Azov and Right Sector. Ilya Kiva was himself a member of Right Sector until hijacking Socialist Party of Ukraine in 2017, then joining pro-Russian opposition platform for life and now hiding in Russia from his treason charges, praising Putin at every step and talking about pesky Nazis in Ukraine. So again, showing you these are not left-wing parties. So you can go to Wikipedia, look this guy up. It is true. Kiva expressed support for the invasion, claiming, quote, the Ukrainian people need liberation. And he also claimed that Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians are one people. Furthermore, he stated that Ukraine was enslaved and brought to its knees by the West, imbued with Nazism, and has no future. He blamed the war on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and urged him to resign. So you can see why Ukraine why they have the desire to ban parties like this. That doesn't mean they are justified in doing so, as it is clearly an undemocratic move. But it's just to show you their justification, and maybe you agree with it. Maybe you think, regardless of if it's democratic or not, you think it's the right thing to do because this is not helpful in this situation. Fine. I think that's a debate worth having, but to understand it is not democratic to do this. That said, ultimately, of course, this is what matters. So, it's important to center this, because I don't want this part to get lost in any of my criticisms here of various moves that Ukraine has made, or any like I had a video yesterday this weekend covering how there have been random Russians just canceled culturally. So you had a cosmonaut who was removed from the Space Foundation just because he was Russian, and then you had a Russian pianist who his concert, or he was canceled from his concert. He's like a Russian prodigy just because he's Russian. So you can recognize these things are ridiculous, point that out, while still not defending Putin, while still not justifying the invasion of Ukraine. Some people have a hard time holding these two thoughts at the same time. And it shows. So it's clear you have to be aware of what matters. Again, just go. If this is hard for you to understand, think back again to the Iraq War or any other U.S. invasion. You can pick certain things out, be like, oh, well, this leader did this country did that, that was wrong, that was undemocratic, so that means the U.S. can and should invade them. I assume you wouldn't have that position, so why would you have that position when it comes to Russia invading Ukraine? It's important to keep that in mind. Ultimately, what matters here is Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the impact it is having on the civilian population.